Welcome to another edition of Substack Live right here inside the Substack app, golongtd.com, right in your email inbox, wherever you got the alert. Thank you so much for joining the chat. I just figured it was another good time to record one of these, answer questions that you all may have. The deals are flying. Right before we dinged record on this episode, looks like Zach Bond re-signed with the Philadelphia Eagles. 3-year deal, 51 million, 34 of that guaranteed via Schefter, Rappaport, all the usual suspects there that are plugged in with agents, with teams. So yeah, we can get into any of the deals that have gone down. Max Crosby becomes the richest non-quarterback in the NFL. That's another one. DK Metcalf can now be had via trade. I imagine we'll get a few DK questions. There's some really good receivers available. DK Metcalf, Christian Kirk. Everybody laughed at that deal, which was quite rich for Jacksonville. That was 3 years ago. He produced. My God, they were 8-3 at one point, in line for the number one seed in 2023. He, suffers that brutal groin injury, done for the year. The Jaguars fall apart. Another bad year. Everybody's fired. Things can happen pretty fast in this NFL, huh? But yeah, Christian Kirk's available. DK Metcalf, I would think that Green Bay and general manager Brian Gutekunst they should be doing everything in their power to acquire a talent like DK Metcalf. Maybe that's the question. Let's start there. And we're going to get into the quarterbacks. I definitely want to talk quarterbacks because I'm so fascinated. The demand for the position is there. But as we know, if you're a good quarterback, you're never going to get to free agency by and large. There is one, Sam Darnold. You can get some pretty strong opinions both ways when it comes to him. But the demand is there. The supply is not free agency, the draft, but a lot of teams need a quarterback. So in that game of musical chairs, who's actually going to find their quarterback? I think a lot are going to be left without a chair. We'll get to all of that, but let's just start right there with the wide receiver position, which I know we've got a lot of Green Bay Packer fans, a lot of Buffalo Bills fans, obviously here at Go Along. So if you have any questions down those lines, just post it right here on the Substack Live. I got to think that the youngest team in the NFL the last 2 years, the Green Bay Packers, are going to try to get older. That doesn't mean they have to find bald individuals like the person you're for some reason staring at right now. But you know what? If you get in these playoff games, when you get into January, you need some players with those pelts on the wall. We all remember what happened just last January in that wild card game against Philadelphia. Something bad happens right out of the chute. Turnover. Was it a turnover? Was it not? It doesn't matter. It happened. And psychologically, it just seemed like Green Bay never really recovered from that. Now, Philadelphia was going to win that game. We saw how loaded they were against the Rams, and then the Commanders, and then the Kansas City Chiefs. But at the same time, I mean, it did not have to go sideways the way it did. So, I don't know. Having veterans in the room is going to help. Having veterans in that wide receiver room is especially going to help. Jordan Love, Matt LaFleur, and calling plays. Indecisive, not really knowing what the identity of the offense was going to be for stretches last year, it seemed. And, you're down to Bo Melton and, Malik Heath in that Eagles game. Luke Musgrave had some injuries. They need a veteran. They need somebody catching the ball from Jordan Love that has been there, done that. What does it cost you? That's the question. It's going to cost you something. I would think the Seattle's going to want. I don't think it's going to be steep. I mean, everybody knows DK Metcalf is on the market now, but it's going to cost you something. And I get it. I get the negatives when it comes to a player who isn't necessarily running a wide array of routes. He does it different than a lot of receivers. But I do like the fact that he's younger than Davante Adams. And we've talked about Davante Adams in this space quite a bit. He was a big part of the mailbag, which is posted live right now at golongtd.com. You guys had some excellent questions. We got to all of them. Caleb Williams and the Bears, I mean, they've been taking some action. Love what they're up to right now. To Davante Adams and a potential reunion with the Packers. And he's 33. DK Metcalf, or I should say he is he 32 when he's soon to be 33? Yeah, he's 32. He turns 33 on Christmas Eve this year. And DK Metcalf is 27 and he turns 28 about exact 10 days before that. So he is 5 years younger. And he obviously he's had some injuries, but even then, in a 6-year career, has over 6,000 yards, 48 touchdowns. There aren't many humans on the planet sculpted quite like DK Metcalf. It's still kind of insane that he fell to where he did in the draft. Was the bottom of the second round. And it is wild too. Is Howie Roseman, and we're going to spend all kinds of time praising Howie all off season long. I mean, he had those 2 drafts where he passes on Justin Jefferson and DK Metcalf and Terry McLaurin and Metcalf in the same draft, just whiff badly on much worse receivers that are out of the NFL. And yet they recover. They draft Devontae Smith. They trade for A.J. Brown. They find a way to stay aggressive at that position. Even in that, it was crazy to see DK fall like he did. He's running 4.4. He's throwing up whatever he did on the bench. There's nobody built quite like him. I don't really care that he can't run the routes of other guys. He has strengths that other players can only dream of. So if you're the Packers, if you're established, I say you go after this guy as hard as you possibly can. Maybe it's not nothing stupid, right? You're not gonna completely gut your capital and first round pick and a premium player, anything like that. But I think a reasonable offer can be made there. All right. Does anybody have any questions? We've got a good group in here, so just let me know. I know, when it comes to the Bills, they could also use a receiver, but the more you think about it, and we've spent much time discussing what's gone wrong at the end of these seasons. I kind of agree with Brandon Beane. Like we can talk about the offense and that need for a speed element, and they do need some stuff to happen on that side of the ball. They need Dalton Kincaid to be healthy. Number one, he wasn't last year with that PCL. He could have shut it down if he wanted to. And Keon Coleman has to play stronger, has to fight through some pain. That the team itself is telling us that they got to have a jump as top picks in back-to-back years. But this is an offense that scored 30 touchdowns on the ground, 30 plus through the air, average 30 points a game. In these playoff games, by and large, they do their part. The conversation for the Bills probably shouldn't be around DK Metcalf. It'd be nice, but I think you try to maintain on offense and get Kincaid and Keon Coleman to a good spot, and you've got to redefine that defense. It's probably not going to happen in one off season. We can't just become larger on the defensive line, faster in the secondary, quicker in the secondary. Yeah, just like that. What do they do then? And we had a really good talk last night at Sunny Reds for Pat Moran's podcast, Talking Buffalo. Joined Pat and Joe Biscaglia of The Athletic. We went back and forth on this debate. I mean, I'm all for the Myles Garrett pursuit. Why not? Josh Allen's 29. The Super Bowl's wide open. They are willing to spend from an ownership perspective and in ways that other owners are not. Terry Pagula, when it comes to the Bills, is going to spend money. I would think that he'd give Brandon Beane the green light to do everything in its power to acquire Myles Garrett. All for it. But does it happen? I got to think that there's a team out there that's going to be a little more desperate, better draft ammo, tougher, and then the Buffalo Bills. So that still kind of strikes me as a pie in the sky. Not quite a pipe dream. I mean, it's realistic. I don't know, man. I just feel like there's going to be a team out there that does offer a little bit more than Buffalo. So if that's the case, you got to be a little more strategic. You've got to find your own Zach Bond kind of signing. There's got to be. This is where your pro scouting department really comes into play. You've got to be able to project into the future, see a player with potential who's maybe buried as a second or third stringer, playing on special teams, who fits what you do, can be a difference maker for what you do. But Zach Bond spent 4 years on the same special teams, playing sparingly as a linebacker. Is he a edge rusher? Is he a pass rusher? Is he an off the ball guy? They've got a vision for him with Vic Fangio, Howie Roseman, and he is an all-pro. I mean, he's up for Defensive Player of the Year, and now he signs the big contract before he even hits the market. And I think that is a really good point to make. Howie Roseman and the Eagles also know when to lock up their guys. It sends such a good message inside the locker room when you take care of your own. They've done it forever. He's done it forever. And Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Lane Johnson, Zach Bond, go right down the list. I mean, they Saquon Barkley just a few days ago. Nobody saw that one coming. And on paper, he is now the richest running back in the history of the NFL on an annual basis. He's worth it. Everybody in that locker room saw what Saquon Barkley did. Everybody knows how important he is to the team. He's the reason that you get those big plays in the passing game that you had against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl too. So you take care of them, even when you don't necessarily need to. That's just good for morale, good for camaraderie. It's a good message to send, and it starts with the identification of players that you know fit what you do schematically better than anywhere else. And Zach Bond, what a find! One of the best free agent findings in the last decade, 2, 3 decades. I mean, who in the hell even knew who this guy was? And he's out there making plays all over the field, forcing fumbles, picking passes off. They don't get to the Super Bowl and win it without him, and now they get the deal done before he even hits free agency. I would really just be pissing in the wind if I was going to be guessing at names that the Bills or any team for that matter should go after at a premium rate. But that's what you want if you're a contender. And what are they going to? Here we got Tim Parker weighing in. He says Javon Holland has been rumored to be a Panthers target. Would he be a net positive or no if he and others weren't receptive to Fangio? I can't say that would get me excited. Tim, our resident Panthers expert, always good to hear from you, my man. Javon Holland, interesting player, interesting debate. Loved him as a playmaker. Pre Fangio, he obviously was on the rise, especially with Jalen Ramsey and what they were doing in the secondary. It seemed like the Dolphins defense was trending in the right direction. You bring in Fangio. My God, this is a guy who also could be a good bench coach for Mike McDaniel. Been there, done that as a head coach, all in on what Miami was doing, and then it just blew up in their face. And it seemed like these guys didn't want to be coached hard by Vic Fangio. I mean, hell, when he left, you have Javon Holland literally kicking rocks and posting it on social media. So that's a problem. And what has happened to the Miami Dolphins in some of these cold weather games against these games against playoff teams? They get pushed around. They're not tough enough mentally or physically. We should definitely devote a full podcast, a full story, trying to figure out where the Dolphins go. It seems like you've got bigger issues there. But Javon Holland just didn't mix with Vic Fangio, and the Eagles were A-OK being coached hard. When we talked to Zach Bond down there at the Super Bowl, and he was careful with his words on many topics, but when it came to Vic, he admitted that many players feel the quote-unquote wrath of, and he hadn't, but he had seen it. He had witnessed it. Hey, the Eagles win is a win for the sport itself, for old school coaching, and it is a fine line. You don't want to go, full Mike Zimmer, and we've chronicled his ending in Minnesota. It was ugly, and many players, veterans and young guys, really thought that he changed at the end and was abrasive at the end and impossible to deal with in many cases. So, not saying you got to go full Junction Boys and have these coaches just running these guys until they puked all training camp. But I don't know, some hard coaching is a good thing. I'm kind of getting off the rails there for you. So I guess that's my filibustering way of saying I don't know, Tim. I mean, maybe a fresh, fresh scenery, different coaches, different scheme, up and coming team. You talk yourself into the Panthers. Maybe that's a good spot for. I got to think the Panthers are going to be aggressive as they should be. This is a big year for Bryce Young. But you know what's kind of wild? There aren't really a ton of top tier free agents at many positions. I mean, a lot of these guys are getting locked up right now as we speak. I mean, I'm sure we'll have some notifications pop on the phone as we're doing this Substack live. There's just not a lot of guys available. Yeah, there's a lot of money to spend. You got teams like the Commanders, the Patriots, the Bears. They have money. I think that's why you kind of seen the Bears do what they've done too. Is they see Trey Smith as the premier guard to be had. Their line was a joke last year. Caleb Williams sacked the third most in NFL history. A lot of it's on him. You heard from Matt Hasselbeck on the pod. He puts a ton of it on Caleb Williams. And I think Caleb Williams has owned it to an extent, but the line was too often a sieve. And to take care of it, credit to Ben Johnson, Ryan Poles, whoever in the hell is making these calls now. They aggressively get Jonah Jackson, who, yes, has had injuries, and he has a high number. It looks like a steal because it's a 6th-round pick, but you're taking on the bigger contract. But if he gives you 13, 14 solid starts, that's a win for your offense. And then also you trade for Joe Thuney. I mean, that's another win. So I feel like they're aggressively going after an area of need before free agency, before the tampering period really opens up, because there's not a lot of free agents out there. So let's get to the quarterback position then, because you go through history, you don't even, it doesn't even be like that recent. Go back 10, 15 years. How many quarterbacks have hit free agency, signed big deals, and panned out? It just very, very rarely ever happens. Brock Osweiler comes to mind. Jimmy Garoppolo with the Raiders. There's not many guys that get to, if you're getting to this point, there's probably a reason you're getting to this point. And yet there are a lot of teams that need a quarterback. That's why you have the Giants and the Raiders aggressively trying to make a good offer for Matthew Stafford, who maybe in the end he was never going to leave the Los Angeles Rams. Maybe it was all posturing, trying to squeeze out some more money, restructuring. And yeah, he wants to stay with Sean McVay. He wants to stay with a winner, wants to stay in a dome. Not a bad life for Matthew Stafford and his family out there in LA. Also, you look at their division. My God, I mean, the Seahawks today, you're losing Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. They're shedding all kinds of salary across the roster. San Francisco, what in the hell is going on with this team? Man, this is why you have to pay your own when you have the opportunity, like Howie Roseman and the Eagles. They kind of waited, played hardball a little longer than they probably should. And now Debo Samuel obviously goes to Washington. Brandon Ayuk sounds like he might be on the block at this point. They just gave him that big deal last year. Trent Williams, McCaffrey, both getting older. Are you going to pay Brock Purdy $60 million a year, and he has no weapons around him, or it's an aging core around him? Man, what a mess John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have created for themselves, which is a shame because they were just in overtime with the Kansas City Chiefs 2 years ago. Probably should have figured out a way to get some of these done, or figure out, I don't know, a better course of action with some of these aging players. This just strikes me as a team on the cusp of nosediving into 7-10, 8-9 purgatory. And that's a place you don't want to be. So the quarterbacks, I'm sure we've got a lot of people on this call, a lot of people listening to the audio after the fact. We're watching the video. The root for a team that needs a quarterback. The Giants, obviously, Joe Shane and Brian Dable, they've got to find their guy this offseason for the present, for the future. Maybe they don't necessarily need to win the playoffs or they're fired, but they have to kind of sell a direction to John Mara and ownership that this thing is going it's going the right way, trending the right way. The Raiders, I mean, Gardner Minshew was just a disaster, obviously. The draft could not have gone any worse. I get it. You get Brock Bowers. He's setting all these tight end rookie records, breaking Mike Ditka, the record that stood for, God, 6+ decades. But you didn't get a quarterback. Everybody was drafted before that. What do? You go right. There are several teams. I mean, I guess New Orleans, they're going to stick with Derek Carr, but the Browns need a quarterback. The Titans need a quarterback at the top of the draft. Are they going to just take Cam Ward, take Shador Sanders because they're there? Or do they try to survive a year with a Kirk Cousins, a Justin Fields, an Aaron Rodgers? There isn't a very deep supply. And I do want to have a column. I'll try to get to it here later this week. I think there's a backup quarterback out there that we're not talking about nearly enough. I don't think I've seen his name pop up anywhere from anyone. That if I'm a team looking for a quarterback, I'm trading for this guy. I'm making a mildly aggressive trade for this backup quarterback. So we'll write that for Friday. And it has been a little quiet at the site in terms of stories. That is for good reason. Monday, Tuesday, and today I've been working on a feature on an offensive coordinator for an AFC team with Super Bowl aspirations, who's central to everything with that team. So we'll share more details soon, but that's why it's been a little quieter. But rest assured, we'll get free agency columns coming soon. All right, let's see what else we got here in the chat. And sorry that, but just kind of disappeared. All right, we've got James Schwartz says the Giants should draft Abdul Carter, as there isn't a first round quarterback in this draft. Reaching for Ward or Sanders is just not smart, he says. They should wait to get Milrow or Howard in later rounds. Ooh, Will Howard, did you see that combine? I feel bad for Dave, as he's a good coach, but Shane is an idiot. This is James Schwartz. Not a fan of Joe Shane. Okay. It's been rough for this regime. And maybe the decision to stick with Daniel Jones alone is grounds for dismissal. It has been for GMs past. But I feel like if you're John Mara and the Giants, you owe it to yourselves, you owe it to your GM, you owe it to your head coach to give them this opportunity to find their quarterback, develop that quarterback. That's why you hired them in the first place. And both it's it's easy to just assume that everybody around a Patrick Mahomes or around a Josh Allen or around a Joe Burrow and just say, oh, they're all geniuses. They all should get promotions. Look at how good these quarterbacks are. I living here in Buffalo, I do really believe that Brian Dable had an unbelievable effect on Josh Allen and his growth as this young, raw, unproven wild stallion out of Wyoming. I mean, he needed a ton of coaching, and he got really good coaching. And then Josh Allen took it to another level with his own work ethic, what he did in the offseason with Jordan Palmer, all that stuff. But yeah, Dave's was like a major factor in all that, just as Joe Shane was a major factor in the pursuit of Josh Allen. You got to remember that time. I mean, those who live in Western New York remember it. It's not hyperbole to say that the majority of fans prefer Josh Rosen with that pick. He was the player that they were watching on TV more. He was polished. They didn't want to hear about hand size. They didn't want to hear about physical attributes. Not a few years after E.J. Manuel and countless other quarterback failures here in Western New York. I think that the prevailing hope in Buffalo and Bills fans beyond Buffalo was the more polished player in Josh Rosen. And Brandon Beane, Joe Shane, the Bills had the balls to take an unpopular pick there. I think, and I've talked to Joe Shane about this. I don't think it's BS. I think it's real. That everything that went into that conviction decision, it matters. And that's ultimately how he got the job as the Giants GM. Okay, so let's bring it to this draft, James. Because I mean, maybe there is no quarterback that is going to save your team in this draft. And we've seen that before. I don't think it's quite 2013 to bring it back to the Bills. Buddy Nix declares publicly, we need a quarterback. We're going to go get one. This is the year. I was a pretty awful poker player. Ask my friends. Ask my brother. They could tell when I wanted to get out of the game and just relax back in high school. So that I do know that's a pretty bad poker move if you're Buddy Nix and need a quarterback. And that draft was just terrible. I mean, there's no way to put it. Years later, we find out that Geno Smith is pretty good in the right situation. But other than that, you had Mike Glennon, Ryan Nassib, EJ Manuel. There was not much going on that year. And yeah, that's the year they decided to take one. So you have a year like that. You've got a year like Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder, Matt Corral. Who else was in that group? Brock Purdy. He's Mr. Irrelevant, but another bad year. I don't think it's to that extreme from what I've gathered, at least talking to some people around the league. But yeah, it's not ideal if you're picking third overall. It's not Joe Burrow, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, Jalen Hurts of 2020. The timing has just been off for the Giants. It's just a bad luck year to year to year. We talked about it with Art Stapleton last week on the pod. But maybe there is a chance. Cam Ward has a big arm. I think it says something that he transfers and he puts Miami on his back and he sets that record. Terrible look in the bowl game to just tap out. I think he does have to answer for that as a competitor. I mean, Even if he's getting bad advice, you're a grown man at the end of the day. You can make your own damn decisions. How is he going to explain that to teams? I'd love to be a fly on the wall in those discussions. And as much as I loved Art's reasoning on Shador Sanders or Stapleton on why he thinks that's the best fit for the Giants, hard time getting past the reality that he's a smaller, a generous 6'2", right? 6'1" and change. Not that heavy, not that big of an arm, not that like what is the one trait that kind of pops? We got into this often with Jim Monis on Bryce Young and figuring out, okay, what is that trait that Bryce Young has that's going to help him kind of compensate for being shorter, thinner? He started to see it toward the end of last year, man. He got into a rhythm. It was NBA Jam style. He was seeing it quick. The ball spitting out quick. They invested in Robert Hunt for that interior protection, trying to follow that Saints model, Jari Evans and Carl Nix, give a shorter quarterback depth of pocket because he's out in that pocket. So I think there's hope. Bryce Young played better than CJ Stroud last year, straight up. So yeah, you can do it, but I guess I didn't see Shador Sanders enough to really have a strong opinion either way. The fact that we've got to kind of rationalize and him and Hall, like you don't want to be doing that if you're picking a quarterback third overall, or if you trade up to number one and take him. But you do also have to trust in Dable and his coaching, trust Shane and his evaluation, and if you're the Giants, you've got to take one of them. You know what? You can't just try to get by with Russell Wilson or hell, I don't know, Aaron Rodgers. If that's the plan, if that's the 5-year plan, it kind of reminds me of that scene in Big Daddy, right? He's got a 5-year plan. Well, what is it? Don't die? Like that's the plan, Aaron Rodgers? The numbers are really deceiving. The numbers will be blasted all over your TV this week, next week. Whoever ends up signing him, I guess, still have a feeling that he might get Belichicked here. Like when you bring on Aaron Rodgers, you're bringing on more than just a quarterback. I don't know. That would not be the move if I'm the New York Giants. I mean, I don't know how you sell that to your boss, to the fans, to everybody. Saw it in your own stadium. He's not the same player. And then what do you do after that? If you're just gonna kind of roll with a quarterback because you got to start somebody and you're just trying to be good enough around 500 to justify another year, I think you do got to do something bold here. If you think that Ward is good enough, if he's got a chance to be a franchise quarterback, even Sanders, I don't know if you have a choice other than to be aggressively get to that number one pick, take that player, and go for it. Go for it. And you can have a decent team around that quarterback. You've got Malik Neighbors. He's a stud. Tyrone Tracy. He might be a stud. He looked really good as a rookie. You can sign Stephon Diggs. I wouldn't be surprised one bit if the Giants are the team that maybe pays a little extra for Diggs. Now, Diggs might want to go to a contender that's going to win right now, but he loves Chad Hall, the wide receivers coach. Chad Hall loves him. When I talked to Joe Shane about Malik Neighbors during training camp last year, who's the player he brought up? Stephon Diggs. They like the fact that he's got some shit to him, some Steve Smith to him, sans the off the field stuff when it comes to Steve Smith. That's a tough Google search right now. But yeah, I think Diggs, a player like that, they're going to add another weapon. They should add another weapon. It's not going to be total disaster. That's my point. It's not going to be total disaster for a rookie quarterback there in New York. Not as much as people might think. So, I mean, I think saving your job, that's the great debate, I guess, if you're Shane and Dable. Like, you've got to fight for your job. You've got to win some games. But also, I think it's kind of cheap to just go the Rodgers route, even the Justin Fields route. Find somebody that's just going to be kind of good enough to maybe, hopefully, possibly win 7 games, get you the next year. Then what's the plan? I don't know. You've been scouting these guys. You should have a feel for them. If you think they're going to be just total, absolute busts, then I guess you got to do something else. And it doesn't seem like the quarterbacks beyond these two, maybe Jackson Dart. Hey, Kyle McCord, Syracuse guy. Maybe one of them pan out. Doesn't sound like it from the scouts. And Bob McGinn's going to be breaking all of that down once again at Go Long. He'll have his draft series, and it's going to come a little sooner. Usually we run Bob's draft series like that week right before the draft. This year it's going to come out, I believe, probably like that first week of April. So a great time to subscribe if you're on the free list or just stopping by. Bob is talking to scouts all over the country, of course. All right. Any other questions before we sign off? We've got a lot cooking at Go On. I see somebody mentions Joe Flacco. Hey, maybe bring Joe Flacco into the quarterback room and save everything. That's kind of the point. There's not a lot of options out there. Like Chris Ballard is talking about bringing in quote unquote competition for Anthony Richardson. Who are you going to bring in? I mean, Fields is probably going to cost a little more than the others because he's at least done it to an extent. I don't know, 11, 12 mil a year. Are you in a position if you're the Colts to do that? And then are you going to bring in somebody who is going to be looking better than Richardson in training camp, and you feel like you have to play it, and then you're done with Anthony Richardson? That's kind of a mess in Indianapolis. They just need Anthony Richardson to take a big step. I don't know if he will. There's work ethic issues. The sources within the team itself kind of call that out. Tapping out of that play did not go over well in that locker room. He gets benched. He comes back. It's a little uneven when he comes back. He came in raw. He played 1 year of college football at Florida, really. Still needs development. But you do wonder, how long do you stay patient if you're the Colts? So many teams, not many quarterbacks, some major, major decisions ahead. Thank you so much, everybody, for hanging out with us on this week's Substack Live. And hey, if you're on the free list, we'd love it if you subscribe to golongtd.com to get access to all columns, all features. We'll have a lot for you throughout the season. Thanks so much, everyone.